This FedGov Today program is sponsored by Intact Technology. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, agency goals hit a new high in the president's management agenda, the customer experience piece you might be forgetting, and a transformation underway at OPM. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. Agencies are already at work on their new two-year priority goals for this fiscal year and next. Several of the goals in the president's management agenda have agencies working together. Loren DeJonge Schulman is Associate Director for Performance at the Office of Management and Budget. Loren, welcome. It's great to have you on the program again.
Great to be back.
How much of what is here is new, and how much of it are things that agencies were already doing and are a progression or evolution of those things?
Great question. Let's first talk about what APGs, agency priority goals, are. I think of this as democracy in action. Agencies make a public commitment, they track their progress on what those goals are, and they're about delivering outcomes to Americans in a two-year period. So over in the 2022-2023 time period, they made a progress on nearly 100 goals. About 2/3 of those have continued in some way into the 2024-2025 period. And that means that they either didn't quite make progress, and we want to be open about that we have more to go, or they recognize there's a tremendous amount of opportunity and they want to continue to build on all the success that they had over the past 2 years.
What are some of the areas where not as much progress happened as you would like, and what are some areas where you made the progress that you had hoped to achieve?
It's a great question. So there was a lot of work around broadband, and honestly we succeeded far beyond of what we actually anticipated in the work between the Department of Commerce and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. But there's more to go there. They didn't quite meet the goal that they intended, but they made a tremendous amount of progress and have a lot more to build on, and they've learned a lot in the past 2 years. In addition to that, there's some goals that we've continued from before around increasing the speed of unemployment insurance payments to Americans across the country, initiated by the Department of Labor. At National Science Foundation, they want to make sure that they are having a broader representation of Americans and institutions in the grants that applications that they receive. And the Department of the Interior is also working to better process applications to take land into tribal trust, so that process goes from a really long, onerous one to one that is far more beneficial to the customer and the American people.
I want to come back to the commerce and agriculture example later in the conversation, but are there common themes among the agencies and the projects on which they're working where they're doing well? Are they doing similar things to achieve the results that you and your team want?
It's a great question. So I think first the ingredient list is resident in the goals themselves. Leadership has to be paying attention. They have to have incredibly clear metrics. How do we know that we're succeeding? And they have to be tracking it on a regular basis. But I think the real thing that drives all of them is there a person that they're seeing on the other side of this that this is going to benefit? Or how are they going to actually deliver for Americans in a real and tangible way? When they find those stories and they can find what is it that's actually preventing that success, that is a supercharge into actually delivering the outcomes we're looking for.
All right, regarding your term tracking on a regular basis, how much of it is the agency tracking on a regular basis, and how much of it is knowing that OMB is tracking on a regular basis?
Well, I mean, OMB is always happy to track on a regular basis, but this comes back to that point I was making on this is democracy in action, where it's not just that agencies saying, hey, we're going to go do a thing. They owe it to us, they owe it to OMB, they owe it to everyone on screen to say, how are we doing every quarter, and put that up on performance.gov and say, here's what we learned, here's what we're struggling with, and here's what we're going to do in the next quarter in order to get better.
So to your example about clear goals and clear benchmarks, using that commerce and agriculture example, Department of Commerce and the United States Department of Agriculture, I'm reading from performance.gov, continuing to partner on a joint goal to expand access to high-speed broadband with 6 million households and other locations by September 30th, 2025. Is that technically a cross-agency priority goal because two agencies are working on it together? How technical should I be when I'm looking at those kinds
So when you look at the words, yes, it is two agencies working on something, but it's not quite a cross-agency priority goal, but I'll come to that. So the problems and opportunities that we work on in government, they don't fit with their organizational charts. They don't look at what does labor do and what does interior do and say yes, I'm going to design my problem for you. We want to encourage more of this, where agencies are identifying a challenge and having their leadership bring their collective energy and their ingenuity together to actually deliver on this. So there's examples like the high-speed broadband. I think the National Electric Vehicle Charging Network that is being worked on across the country with a lot of success. That's another great example. But cross-agency priority goals are actually somewhat different. They are longer-term challenges where you need if not all, then most of agencies to find progress and work on together. So we actually aligned those with the President's management agenda, strengthening and empowering the federal workforce, delivering better, seamless, and secure customer experience to the American people, aligning our acquisition system so it actually meets our national priorities and buys things that make sense for us as a government, and delivering federal financial assistance in a more streamlined, secure way.
What are the things that you'll measure differently in this fiscal 24-25 agenda than you did before, if at all?
It's a great question. So I think it's less that we'll measure differently and more that we'll be able to tell more of the story. On performance.gov, you will start seeing not only more of the data associated with these goals, but it'll be more interactive. You'll be able to track more at home. You'll be able to keep in touch with us and say your report card is right, or here's what you want to follow on to. But performance.gov will be able to showcase a lot more of that performance data and show trends that you might not otherwise be able to see.
I was teasing you a little bit before we went on the air that the site says we invite you to follow along with us at performance.gov, and I certainly will. I thank you for that. You're also tracking pay equity for federal employees. What's behind that? What does that mean to the average person who works for the government today?
It's a great question. So this is one of the things that we highlighted in the President's management agenda around strengthening and empowering the federal workforce. So 2 initiatives that were announced last week were around pay equity for federal workers and another for federal contractors. Bottom line, this is part of the overall agenda of increasing fairness and opportunity for workers across the country. And what it means for federal workers is if you and I had the same experience and we applied to the same job, but you had a higher salary than I did, even though we had the same experience, that will no longer penalize me. Agencies will no longer look at that and say like, oh, well, Francis deserves a higher salary because he had one before. They'll look at our experience, they'll look at our qualifications and with the role that we'll be in, and they'll pay us based on those, rather than the fact that a system of bias may have led to you having a higher salary than I did. And we'll have the same proposed rule being put out by the FAR Council for contractors and those associated with government contracting, so that pay inequity no longer drives pay opportunity going into the future.
How do you avoid getting into a situation where I understand the value of what you want to create here? How do you avoid the potential of getting stuck building a big infrastructure to adjudicate some of these things when there are questions or problems or somebody thinks that it didn't turn out the way that it was supposed to turn out? This
is actually something that that fits into our overall agenda of using skills-based hiring. Instead of just saying, check the box, here's my number of qualifications, here's my degree, and so on, we want to do more assessments to look at what am I actually capable of? Am I going to bring the skills to a role that are actually going to be relevant to it? That overall system will help us not only in finding the right talent, but also making sure that we are bringing it to the right compensation, the right benefits, and making sure that it has the right future opportunity.
How does that connect? You mentioned this connects to the President's management agenda. How specifically does it connect to that pillar around the federal workforce? Long view. I get the short view of attracting people, keeping people, and all of that, but what does this look like long term in your view?
Absolutely. So I think long term, we made a priority of wanting to make sure we get the right talent faster and into the right roles. And right now, we started out a few years ago recognizing that hiring managers struggle to get people that they want on board. It takes too long to hire. People are worried that we're not giving the right kind of compensation to the right skill sets. All of those are addressed in addition to some new initiatives we're doing around pooled hiring, which allows me to apply for one job but get access to literally hundreds of them, and allows agencies to put up one hiring opportunity and get access to hundreds of candidates to really speed along that surge hiring and rebuilding of the federal workforce that's necessary.
The hiring pool concept is one that the government has tried and not been successful with for decades now. What do you have in place, or how will you do it this time? You think that it will stick and it will work the way you intend?
So we have some great examples right now where we are trying to learn by cohorts. The AI, Artificial Intelligence Executive Order, has driven us to do a national AI talent search. We are prioritizing a new pooled hiring action as an example around data science, and we want to bring together agencies to learn together about how to execute this in a way that makes sense for them. Identify the barriers, bust through them, and make sure every future action learns from that and going forward.
Loren, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for your time
Thanks
today.
so much, Francis.
You can read more about the pay equity rules and the agency priority goals on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, the customer experience piece you might be forgetting. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. Here's Gina Cinta from Thales Trusted Cyber Technologies on Innovation in Government at DOTUS, brought to you by Carasoft.
Although we don't know when there's going to be a quantum computer that's going to be powerful enough to break asymmetric encryption, you need to be ready. And so that's our messaging that we talk to everybody about is preparing. You've got to do inventory of your crypto so that you know where it's at, and then start working with technology partners out in the industry that have solutions that are already implementing, the pre-certified algorithms in their products, so you can start seeing how it might affect your applications and your integrations that leverage that.
For more, go to innovationingov.com. Welcome back. The Department of Veterans Affairs is celebrating the beginning of the 4th year of its Employee Experience Office. Customer experience experts across government say employee experience is potentially a missing link in CX efforts. Bahar Niakan is Managing Director for HR Modernization at Intact Technology. Bahar, welcome. You wrote recently, employees need simplified experiences in order to be able to focus as much as possible on the mission. What does that involve for a lot of agencies that are just starting to think about the employee experience aspect of their operations?
Well, for instance, employees need access to their information and to be able to take action on that information. And so simplifying the employee experience means not having a federal employee feel like they're spending a full day trying to change their address, and not having a federal manager waiting for information in an Excel spreadsheet to be able to see a reflection of their staff. It's about bringing data to the fingertips of the leaders who need to make decisions about their organization. And so it's about transforming the employee experience. There are enabling technologies right now that make that information visible and allow people to take action on that information. At a previous agency, I brought that information from an HR perspective to the fingertips of our employees, employee information to the employees across the department, accelerating hiring for managers, bringing information across the organization to the leaders so that they could make decisions about and for their organization. And so right now, we have the opportunity to really transform the employee experience by focusing on what matters to them most.
How much of that is changing out systems, the digital transformation that we hear about that all the time? How much of it can be incremental, and how much of it's cultural, just changing the way that people think about the way they interact with their bosses and their agencies?
Well, in my experience, doing wholesale replacements of systems doesn't necessarily change the user experience. Systems are utilized currently by specialists who are applying technical data, using technical jargon. The employees are looking for information that they understand is readily available to them. The reports coming out of those systems aren't presentable to managers and leaders to be able to make decisions in a way that also is reflective of the information that they would regularly be viewing. And so if you can establish a unifying layer over top of these systems, bring the data up, then it becomes a better way to make the information visible and usable by your general population. There are agencies that are understanding that it's more important to be able to really impact the user experience with data than to simply replace the technology that's already in existence. The technology certainly needs to be changed over time, updated, upgraded, potentially replaced, but if you can provide a unifying layer over top to bring the data up, then it provides the people the information that they need to be able to make a decision. One of our customers actually has done this. So they've implemented a platform over top of HR, facilities, IT, budget, and other areas of operations. And so when the employee has a need, for example, an office move, they go to one place to make the request. HR, IT, facilities all become part of the workflow because they've connected the data and they've automated the workflows across these different operational components. And then the employee can go to one page and really see the progress of their request across the course of its time from start to end. Go to one agent and ask questions, and that agent has access to centralized information to be able to support the employer to be able to elevate the issue up. And over time, with AI as an example, they can bring in some additional force multipliers. You know, just as you experience in your banking online today or online shopping, the virtual agent can really support just the basic questions that an employee might have, And the live agent is always available to be able to support the more complex, and it allows the specialists to then provide their consultative support to the customers that they serve.
You wrote, we can only get there if the CHCO and the CIO have a strong collaboration. How does one know that collaboration is strong enough, and why is that collaboration so important, Bahar?
So I think what you're seeing across the federal government today is that everyone's realizing that they need to leverage each other's capabilities and support each other. It's a better together story. The CIO and the CHCO, which is the IT, the head of IT and the head of HR for each department, there's always been a little bit of a push and pull between the two organizations when it comes to systems. Who's the system owner? Who's going to control the system? How are they going to manage it? But they're all supporting the same customer base. And so if they unify their efforts and they unify their energy, they can really get farther together. They can establish the governance that they need for the platform. They can coexist on the platform together, and with support and resources from their senior leadership, just get farther together in supporting the employees and transforming the experience that their internal employees have.
Bahar, it's great to have you on the program. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you, Francis. Great to be here.
You can read more about employee experience efforts across government on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. Up next, a transformation underway at OPM. FedGov Today with Francis Rose continues in a moment. If you want insights from agency and industry leaders on the latest topics in technology, management, workforce, defense, and acquisition, sign up for the FedGov Today podcast with me, Francis Rose. I release new episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, so you'll stay up to date on the issues that matter most to federal government leaders. Listen at fedgovtoday.com and everywhere you get your shows. Don't miss out on the conversation. Follow the podcast today. Welcome back. The Office of Personnel Management's putting data at the center of a lot of its operations. OPM says it'll use that data to strengthen the federal workforce. Catherine Manfrey is Chief Transformation Officer at OPM. Catherine, welcome. It's great to have you on the program. The data that you're using, we'll talk about some of it in particular, FEVs in a moment, and others. What are the ways that you see the agency using that data, though, to be able to strengthen the workforce, both within the work that you're doing at OPM and across the agencies?
Yeah, so the way that we're using data is really a very comprehensive strategy. So we have published our first agency data strategy, which I'm very excited to be able to talk about. And that is really made up of a few different components. So one piece of that data strategy is actually around the data itself. So how do we increase the quality, the timeliness, the relevancy for agency leaders so that they're able to make the right decisions for their workforce? So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is around the culture and the skills. So really focused on the people side of data. How do we create a data-driven culture? How do we make sure that we have the right skill set so that we can be understanding and appreciating our human capital data assets across government? And then the third piece of it is around the usage of data. So data is only as good as the usage of data, as you know. And so at OPM, we've been focused on creating products and services that allow our agency customers and the federal workforce more broadly to understand their data. One example of this is our OPM data portal that has a number of public-facing dashboards like FEVs, like a cyber workforce dashboard that puts the data into the hands of the people that need it.
I'm not aware of a Chief Transformation Officer previously at OPM. What does that person, what do you do in that role, and who do you, I imagine there's a connective aspect to what you're doing, connecting different pieces of OPM together.
Absolutely. So any Chief Transformation Officer role is really around being the person that's responsible for achieving the vision of the transformation. And a lot of that is about collaborating, coordinating, accelerating, and the role that we've designed at OPM is exactly that. I like to think about it a little bit like the conductor of an orchestra. So in the sense that I'm not necessarily the one that's playing any one instrument, but I am the one that's helping to create all the music from the individual instruments. And so part of my role is not necessarily leading a particular initiative, but rather thinking about the portfolio of activities and working really collaboratively with agency leaders across OPM to make sure that those projects are brought to fruition.
Does that mean that regarding the data strategy that you just talked about, one of your jobs is to at least partially oversee the connection of that to the broader agency strategy, where Director Ahuja and the other leading officials would like to see the agency a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, and so on.
Yes, that's exactly right. Part of that role is really connecting the dots between a lot of our different groups within OPM, because there is data that is owned by different program offices across, and as you can imagine, the stewardship, the usage, and the understanding of the customer aspect of taking action on that data is a shared responsibility across the agency. And so I think this is a prime example of how having a role like a Chief Transformation Officer is really necessary for bringing that vision into reality.
All right, let's talk about some data,
right,
particularly the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. What did you see in the numbers this year that are a good sign, and what did you see that was a sign that there is still work to do?
So on some of the highlights, this is actually a really easy question to answer this year because we have a lot of good news to share. So first, the response rates government-wide did go up, which is a really positive sign and can mean that employees are seeing the action being taken by leaders in real time. The second thing is a number of our major indices also went up. So to highlight two of them, our employee engagement index went up by 1 percentage point to 72%, and our DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, a little bit of a mouthful, went up by 2 percentage points this past year. Now, those numbers may not sound like a big deal, 1 percentage point increase, 2 percentage point increase, but when you're talking about the federal government, that's a lot of hearts and minds that you are changing in order to see those kinds of results. So really good news there. To your point of your question of where do we see some of the things that we need to continue working on, the first thing I want to say to that is employee engagement, employee experience, it's a little bit like gardening. You have to routinely tend to your garden. I don't know if you garden, I really like to garden in my own backyard, and what you know about gardening if you do it is that perennials only keep coming back if you tend to them over time, and I think employee engagement is very similar. I think the thing that we want to encourage agencies to be doing, though, is to be taking their individual results and really drilling down into them to understand specifically where their agencies or sub-agencies or components might need to be thinking about taking more action. And I will say that OPM is taking its own medicine and doing that internally as well to understand where we have some bright spots and where we need to be thinking about making further improvements.
What do you see that where you could make improvements, whether it's the FEVs or some other way that you're gauging the way the employees are responding to what's going on inside their organizations? What do you want to do with that? Are you changing the FEVs? Are you doing improvements to it to try to understand better the data that you're getting from people?
So the way that what we're doing to respond to help people understand their data is actually, there's been 3 buckets of activity on this one. So the first piece has been making improvements on the survey, which we have been making over the past couple years. So the DEIA index, as I mentioned earlier, that's one example. We've also added questions around innovation and resilience and customer responsiveness. And so those are all ways that we are trying to be responsive to agencies so that they can better understand their workforce. The second area of activity is around understanding data. So back to the original topic of conversation around data, we've been also working to create dashboards for agencies to better and more quickly understand their data. And then the last piece of what we've been working on is around encouraging agencies to take action. So one big example of this is a working group and community of practice under the auspices of the Chief Human Capital Officers Council. And that group has been meeting to both understand promising practices from different agencies, to talk about germane topics related not just to FEVs, but other measures of employee engagement, and to share different ideas of how to continue to make improvements. So all 3 of those pieces are a part of OPM's broader push to help agencies understand their data and take action on it so that we can create a better employee experience for all of the federal workforce.
When you talked a moment ago about agencies taking action on this data, you emphasize speed.
Yes.
Why is that important, and how do you measure whether agencies are responding to the data quickly enough to not just to make a difference in the numbers, but to make a difference in the actual employee experience?
Yeah, so the reason why we think that speed of action is important is that if you're asking an employee to take this survey, it's important that they feel like their voice is actually being heard and responded to. One of the things we've actually talked quite a bit about in this community of practice that I mentioned is the need to continually talk about the activities and actions that leaders are taking so that employees don't feel like it's a thing that you only talk about when the survey is in the field, but rather it's something that you're talking about throughout the year. Part of this also is that, you know, the FEV specifically is a moment in time, and so the closer that your actions are to that moment in time, the more connected it's going to feel to employees.
We have about a minute left. What will you look at when the FEVS rolls out this year, maybe that you didn't look at last year or that you look at differently, not in what's in the survey, but in the way that you collate the responses and analyze the results?
So I think there may be a few things that we'll be looking for. I mean, FEVS is a great survey because it not only allows for the starting point for a conversation and to highlight where there are areas of positive improvement versus not, but it also allows you to track progress over time. And so if you think about the President's management agenda, the workforce priority, that has a number of FEVS measures in it that we're using to track progress. So I think those might be immediate places that we'll be keen to take a look at. And I think that the other thing that we would encourage agencies to do is both to be using this FEV specifically as a proactive data point for their workforce strategies for decision making, but also to think about that survey next to other data points that they have related to their human capital and employee experience, because FEVS is only one data point of many. So thinking about that in the context of all of the other pieces of data that they're collecting related to their workforce.
Catherine, it's great to have you on the program.
Thank you so
much.
Thanks.
You can read more about the FEVS and the transformation at OPM on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com. FedGov Today continues in just a moment. Innovation in Government from DOTUS, presented by Carasoft, is available now on demand. This program showcases the intersection of technology and government, with insights from government and industry leaders on topics like AI, modernization efforts, secure data movement, and quantum computing. You'll learn from leaders from NGA, DIA, SOCOM, and lots more. To learn more and watch the show, visit innovationingov.com. Welcome back. In today's event spotlight, the Department of Defense and civilian agencies will connect with the tech sector at TechNet Emergence, March 11th and 12th at the Hyatt Regency in Reston, Virginia. AFCEA International hosts it. You'll meet leaders that are looking for new tech, including AI, biotechnology, telecom, quantum computing, and more. You can read more about TechNet Emergence and register at fedgovtoday.com/events. FedGov Today TV returns next Sunday morning at 10:30 with the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Lisa Franchetti, and the Director of DISA, Lieutenant General Robert Skinner. I'm Francis Rose. I'll see you next Sunday. Thanks for watching. Have a great week.